The functions f of x and g of x are graphed below. Determine f of 4. So in order to evaluate f of 4, what we will do is use the graph, because the graph represents all the points that are contained in the function f of x. We don't have a function definition like 2x minus 5 or anything of that sort. We don't need that because we have all the points that exist. And each point, no matter where it is, that point looks like the coordinates x comma y, where y is the value of f of x. That's just how we come up with graphs. So if you want to know what f of 4 is, we just need to find out where 4 is on the x. So it's here, and the question is basically asking where is that function in the y. So at x equals 4, the y value is at 2. So that's our answer. Determine g of 4. Now g of 4, we would find 4 on the x, and then determine where that point is in the y. So that's at -1. Then determine f plus g evaluated at 4. So f plus g evaluated at 4 would be the same as doing f of 4 plus g of 4. And we have each of these values already. So what that means is we can just take 2 plus -1, which would be 2 minus 1, or 1. And that's the value of f plus g of 4. Okay, the next set here asks us to evaluate f of -1. So f of -1, we find -1 on the x and where f is in the y. And that's at +1. Determine g of -1. So we go to the other graph. Here's x is -1. The y value is -1. So now we want to determine f minus g evaluated at -1. So that would be f of -1 minus g of -1. So that gives me 1 minus -1, which would be 1 plus 1, or 2. Determine f of -4 and g of -4. So f of -4 is this point here, which has a y value of -2. G of -4 is this point here, which has a y value of 1. So f of -4 was -2. G of -4 was +1. So g minus f of -4 would be the function value g of -4 minus the function value f of -4. So g of -4 we determined to be 1. F of -4 we determined to be -2. So 1 minus -2 is the same thing as 1 plus 2, or 3. Now lastly, f of -1 and g of -1 we've actually already determined, so we'll just use those results. We've already determined them to be 1 and -1 respectively. But the final result, we want to determine f times g of -1, which means we need to take f of -1 times g of -1. So if you notice, there's no dot in between these, and that's okay. That's another way of expressing multiplication. Now that we know that, the result is 1 times -1, which is -1.